Hi, I'm Liz Cully, and welcome back to Cool, Cool, Cool. Each week, I give you a glimpse into what I think is cool and chat with a ton of people that are definitely cool. No topic is off bounds unless I guess it's not cool. Welcome to Cool, Cool, Cool. I started smoking weed when I was in the 7th grade, which I know sounds really, really young, and that is because it is really, really young. I was supposed to be at my school dance, but I went on a walk with two of my friends, and one of them, Griffin, had a pipe and some weed, and I remember not even hesitating. I was like, yes, let's go into an alley. I went to school in San Francisco. Let's go into an alley and let's get fucking high. And I guess that's just what you do when you are 12 years old and you smoke menthols and you give two fucks. You smoke weed at your 7th grade dance and you laugh and laugh and laugh about a Cartman joke. I don't even know what it was. It's seared into my memory that we laughed and laughed about Cartman. I habitually smoked weed until I was about 19 years old, pretty much every single day. I would wake up in the morning, smoke weed. I would go to school, come home from school, smoke weed. Try to not be high at dinner, smoke weed, go to bed. I even went to boarding school, somehow figured out how to smoke weed every single day. It was typically in fields, behind buildings, in cemeteries. I even traveled to other countries and somehow figured out how to smoke weed there. And in hindsight, it was very reckless behavior, but I pretty much stay at home with my dog and my wife these days. So thank God I practiced reckless behavior at some point in my life. Being a teenager in San Francisco in the early 2000s and smoking weed was a really unique experience. I say that because it feels in some ways like the birthplace of America in terms of widespread cannabis love. Obviously, cannabis is a plant that has been around for 1 bajillion years. Yep, that is the scientific and the correct amount of years it's been around. But I think San Francisco, obviously being, the mecca of the hippie movement, weed was everywhere. And it was interesting because I grew up around people of all ages and all backgrounds going up and down the coast to Mendocino, whether they were buying or selling, they were trimming. I used to trim in the summers to make a little extra cash. People's parents smoked, their grandparents smoked, the guy on the corner smoked, your teacher smoked. It was definitely all around us. And then, of course, the laws from a recreational standpoint would kind of change. Sometimes it would be for medical, sometimes it wouldn't, So there was also all of these head shops turned into dispensaries that would be legal for a moment and then illegal. So definitely prowling around San Francisco in the early 2000s, I saw a lot and I met a lot of people. I have very specific and fond memories of smoking weed during Pride in San Francisco's Dolores Park and, being very cautious about the brownies or any of the edibles that I ate in the park. I also remember being in New York in college and being in Washington Square Park and, hanging out with friends and smoking weed and listening to music. Watching all sorts of people smoke weed all around me, coast to coast. They always seemed a lot happier, lighter, brighter than the wasted people spilling out of the bars in the West Village. I knew I was smoking too much weed because I was smoking it all the time. It's like candy. It's not going to technically kill you. It kind of can. But anything you have that is considered a treat, you should do in moderation, right? And I wasn't doing that. I started to develop some throat problems due to singing around 19 and 20. So I took a forced break from cannabis. And I'm not going to lie, I did like feeling more clear-headed. And so I stopped for about 9 years. And then by the time I tried to be interested in cannabis again, it had gotten so strong. Legalization in specific states had happened from a recreational perspective. Weed was being outsourced and money was really pumping into the industry. And I was like, going from smoking a bowl to barely being able to take a hit. And that sucks. Now I barely smoke weed, if I'm being honest with you, but I typically use cannabis from a topical and an ingestible perspective for like specific things, for nausea, menstrual cramps, a headache, to sleep. And it feels like the cannabis industry has grown so much, and there's all of these like fringe kind of subsets. Like I would consider Busy Phillips and her friends, like the white ladies who live in the canyon, to be a fringe group, just as much as I do the queer cannabis group. But through all of this, I have met a lot of really interesting and cool friends in the cannabis space as of late, specifically Drew Martin, Andrew Freeman, Nick Pritzker, who were all behind the brand Drew Martin. I love them. They've become dear, dear friends. And I sat down with Drew to talk about how the cannabis industry has changed and really what the state of it is right now. Is weed gay?
Weed's the gayest. What's not?
I do think weed, it's funny. I think that, or actually, should I say, do you call cannabis weed?
Yeah. You know, we use the terms interchangeably, I think, and kind of depending on the audience. For me, weed is more of a colloquial term. Cannabis we use when we're talking in a space where we're trying to break more stigma and sort of normalize that for other people.
Like rich old white people?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. I think about how much I used to smoke weed. I started smoking weed in 7th grade. I loved it. I remember the first time I smoked weed literally so clearly, which is funny because now I can't remember anything. And yet I can remember that specific. I was in an alleyway. We were supposed to be at my 7th grade dance. And me, my best friend Griffin, my other best friend Gabby, we went into this little alleyway. I went to school in San Francisco. We were like right off of Broadway, and we went into an alley. And
this makes sense.
We smoked weed out of an apple. And for some reason, I couldn't stop laughing about South Park and Cartman. And I just kept laughing and laughing. And then
were you scared?
I wasn't scared. That's what's so interesting. I wasn't scared. I immediately loved it. And then we like doused ourselves in Axe body spray, as one does, to not smell conspicuous. And then we went to the dance, and I went to Catholic school, and they were like, yeah, you're not getting in here. And then, I don't know, we didn't get in trouble, but I smoked at least, I would say, between a half an eighth and an eighth a day.
Damn, that's impressive.
I know.
That's more than
I've ever smoked. And you know me really well. Like, I barely smoked for, I would say, until I was 19. I like really smoked. I mean, I was high all the time. I don't know.
What changed?
I was singing, and I got really bad nodules in my throat, and they said I couldn't smoke anymore. And so I stopped. And what happened is in the time, oh God, you guys can't see this, but we have this golden retriever named Dot who is just desperate to be on Cool. And I stopped smoking weed from about, I would say, what year is that? So that would be 2004. I stopped smoking until like 2013. And guess what happened in those 10 years? Weed got so strong.
So strong.
How did weed get so strong? And so then I'm scared now.
Right.
All the time.
Well, it's a different thing since really the early 2000s. But this is really a function, too, of legalization in California, right? And so when it has come sort of out from the underground, breeding has become a lot more available and readily available. And in that sense, because it's in the open, and there's a market now that can sort of make demands that it maybe couldn't previously. These breeders are really working hard to train the plants to produce higher amounts of THC. So what you're smoking today is 3 to 4 times stronger than what you were smoking in the 90s, in the 80s, in the 70s.
I don't want that. I don't want to smoke weed 3-4 times. What the fuck?
I agree. I hear my dad tell me stories a lot about how they would buy an ounce of weed and sit down between 4 friends and smoke the whole ounce at once. And they felt buzzed.
That sounds wonderful. No, it truly is. I mean, I started smoking weed again. Actually, the first time I smoked weed, this is a true story. In all those years, I smoked weed with Wiz Khalifa.
Okay.
Which
that's
was
legit. I don't feel like he's interested in getting high.
Well, no, it's on the internet. You can see it. It's very well documented where I say to Wiz Khalifa, I don't smoke weed anymore because I get scared. And then there is a GIF, it does exist, where he says, do you want to get scared? It was on video. And that was when Giphy was really coming out. And my editor made it into a GIF and it went all over the fucking internet. And it was crazy. And it was terrible. I was at work and I really felt like I was on mushrooms. And I don't want to be on mushrooms.
And you were scared.
I was scared. Yeah, I was scared. And I do get scared. It sucks because I want to feel like I used to feel when I smoked weed in high school. I would get high and I would listen to music. And I mean, a lot of that is also like my pituitary gland going wild and like all of those things. And
the novelty of it, I'm sure.
Correct. But my relationship, being born and raised in San Francisco, getting weed from kind of black market, there was also a lot of dispensaries. I don't know how privy you are to this, like in the early 2000s in San Francisco that they were medical, but they were totally abused. Like the Golden Triangle. I don't know if that gets me in trouble, but whatever. I don't think it exists anymore.
It does.
The Golden Triangle, not the place, but like the actual dispensary in San Francisco.
Sure
it was on Haight Street.
I'm sure not. Yeah.
And we would go in there and we would hang out for hours. And like,
those were the days when you would buy weed out of like big glass jars.
Yes.
That they would just pull nugs out and weigh them out for you on scale.
Yes.
I do miss that.
Yeah. And it was just like it was a different thing and it was a different time. And it's so interesting, but it was so dominated by like white dudes, like white cis straight guys. Yeah. And I think, and again, maybe I'm not knowledgeable about like how, I guess, other markets, but it felt like business wise, it was kind of capitalized by straight white men. And then obviously all these black and brown folks that were also selling weed were going to jail at disproportionate fucking levels. And there was no gay queer presence. But how does that feel like it's changed, or is it still very much the same?
No, not at all. I think it's exactly the same. I think that, 90% of stakeholders in legal cannabis are straight white men today that are financing everything and still running companies and growing weed. I think that if you go and spend time up in Humboldt and Sonoma, that's what you see, and that continues to be the pervasive culture, all the way down to the brand side and the product side, which is obviously where the space we occupy. But we're one out of a handful in the entire state of hundreds of brands and companies that identify as queer and that are vocal about that.
Do you think that helps you or hurts you with the business being so outspoken about being queer?
Oh, I don't really give a shit whether it helps or hurts. I'm here to say it. But no, I think both. I think on the business side, and if you're looking at things from an industry perspective, I often feel uncomfortable or sort of unfit to occupy these spaces.
Like when you're raising or when you're like going to prospective dispensaries?
Both. Definitely both. But I think generally if I'm at an industry event, if I'm at a conference or something like that, culturally, the dude bro pervasive culture is something that I don't necessarily love to engage in.
Is it still very much like, I've been to a few cannabis, I went to some judge thing. Maybe it was like Sacramento.
Yeah,
I don't
know. The Emerald Cup or any of these things. Yeah.
And it was very much, it felt like I was at a mid to late 90s hip hop reggae festival.
With white people.
Yeah. And is that
you know
still
what?
the
exactly
same?
The same today. Exactly, still the same today. No, and I don't mean to dismiss. There are a lot of people doing incredible work to sort of continue to expand the industry and the community and bring this to new communities. And I don't mean to discredit that, because there is really a powerful movement happening, and specifically with the integration of Black and Brown communities. I think a little bit less so with queer communities.
Well, that's what I mean. I feel like weed. Listen, one of the first ways I was introduced to people using cannabis not in a recreational, fun way was through the AIDS crisis in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Growing up there, I saw, my cousin passed away of AIDS, and watching that as a 10-year-old, like,
yeah,
let me tell you.
Yeah, it's heavy.
I have never fucked a dude without a condom. I'm married to a woman. I've been with her for almost 10 years. It probably won't ever happen again. But I'm just saying, like, I listen to these young people today and they're like, yeah, I never use condoms. And I'm like, wow, you definitely have not seen someone die of AIDS, because I have, and it's gnarly as shit. But back then, a lot of people were making brownies because people were suffering so badly. And it was, again, it was people at home learning how to make the butters, doing the whole thing.
I mean, that's I think the irony here too. Yeah, I mean, you talk about the brownies, I immediately think of Brownie Mary, who was huge in the 90s, started in the 80s and really through the 90s in San Francisco specifically, and really dedicatedly working with AIDS patients in San Francisco. And I think from a larger perspective, California owes its entire cannabis legalization to queer activists and the queer movement that was, unfortunately, because of the AIDS crisis, is why we have legal cannabis today. Dennis Perrone was really the one who spearheaded this, and the name that we know the most as really advocating with the cannabis buyers clubs and moving forward with that. Harvey Milk was a huge advocate of cannabis, and these people were, honest to God, the only reason that cannabis is legal today in California. So to engage with the community today and not see that as even recognized or even understood by any of these people, and all the way from cultivators down to retailers, it's shocking to me that there's no acknowledgement or even understanding or visibility of in my mind, the sole reason that cannabis is legal in California was because of queer activists pushing this forward in a humanitarian effort for the queer community and for the AIDS patients.
I know, it's such an interesting thing. I think people really forget, how political, unfortunately, it is to be queer, and how not only that being visible in that act, but then all of the other things that come with that, right? So it's like, whether it's, trying to get legislation or things like cannabis passed to help those that are suffering from an epidemic like AIDS that is really hitting not only the queer community, but also Black and brown folks too. Yep. I mean, in Atlanta and Georgia specifically, Black women suffer from AIDS and HIV more than anybody else, you know, and they're completely forgotten about. And then, you think about like women's, reproductive rights or marriage equality. Like, it's such an interesting thing that like we're still here and we're still talking about it. But cannabis culture is always so interesting to me because it's a counterculture in many ways.
Absolutely.
Even though it's been around for so long. It's been a medicine that has been used
forever. Yeah. And it's hard to there's such an overlap, I think, between countercultures by the nature of them being counterculture, right? And so in my mind, cannabis as a counterculture definitely has held hands with queer counterculture and, of course, and anti-capitalist counterculture, and obviously the big movement in the 70s and that continues on today. Is you have this deep overlap and sort of mingling between these, and I think to look at one, you need to look at many, right?
Where do you see, I mean, cannabis is in a tricky spot, right? The legalization has done, in some ways, some good. You guys can't see this. Dot is very involved in this conversation and I'm dead obsessed. She's truly the best. It's done a lot of good in terms of, I think, visibility. I mean, the fact that my parents' friends in Florida who are in their 80s and total wasps are like using cannabis instead of alcohol or Percocet or,
exactly,
you know what I mean? Like opioids, like great, and they're more open to it. They're more receptive of it. But it's also done a lot of bad. Yeah. And I think that it's like, and I don't think the normal sort of like everyday person who maybe even doesn't live in a state like California or Chicago or Colorado, where there's been, or Florida, quite frankly, the recreational medicinal, legalization of cannabis understands. But what are like the current challenges you think for a cannabis brand in general? I'm dying. I'm trying to not die. You have to chill, babe.
So bad.
So bad.
So bad to be part of this.
It's just adorable. But what do you think are the current challenges for a cannabis brand?
Yeah.
Because of the legalization in so many places.
I think there's a couple different facets to this. And I obviously can speak specifically to the California market.
Sure.
Because this is where we've been. We just are launching into the New York rec market. But way too early to say anything, right? It's been a month.
When did the MedMen on like Fifth Avenue though open? Remember that?
Years ago, but not selling weed.
What the fuck were they doing?
Opened that as a placeholder. They wanted to hold on until.
And MedMen's donezo? No.
MedMen's not done so. They've kind of shifted and moved around a lot and really refocused all their efforts on California.
Okay.
So they've given up a lot of their other markets and are really kind of regrouping here.
For those listening, MedMen is like they always kind of coin themselves as the Apple store of weed. And it really felt that way. You really had kind of people working in the store, hovering over you in a great way, but also like in an Apple store-esque way. Yeah. But you would look at something and then they would go in the back and get it. And it was a good experience. It's a good experience.
Yeah. And in so many ways, I think that is such a good example of, kind of what cannabis legalization has done. In many ways, MedMen was, led the way for destigmatization in the market. They created a space where people who were not previously cannabis users could feel comfortable and could be educated. On the flip side, going back to your question, what is legalization done? If you're looking at this from a philosophical perspective, it is taking the counterculture out of cannabis. And in that way, that's difficult because you sort of lose a lot of the value-driven nature of what the movement's doing, or can. On the flip side, you're creating access for so many more people, and you're creating the ability to change minds and offer this plant and this medicine to people that otherwise had no idea.
Yeah.
Offering it recreationally to people as a replacement for alcohol or other drugs that can be more harmful to your body and mind. But there's pros and cons to both sides of that. There's difficulty in the legalization in the new market for inequity. In California, has had a really difficult time rolling out legalization in a way that is equitable to stakeholders and to Black and brown communities specifically, who have been targeted by the war on drugs and have not been given a leg up. As we've seen capital flow in and operators come into the space that generally continue to be, white men looking to quite literally profit and capitalize off of this, because now this is within the American capitalistic system. And so it's complex. I think it's nuanced, and you have to really weigh the benefits and then try to really minimize those disadvantages that any legal market's going to bring. And there's some great advocacy and great trade groups and nonprofits that are doing this work. The state's not doing it for us. California really tried to set up an equity program that prioritized those people that had been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, and trying to lift up brown and black people into positions of power and as business owners and licensees. But unfortunately, it's been pretty botched top to bottom.
If I'm not wrong, is cannabis class 1?
Yes.
That's fucking crazy. It's the same as meth.
Yes.
If for any of my Dog the Bounty Hunter fans,
yeah, it is deemed,
it's ice, bruh. Like, right. It's completely fucking insane.
To have zero medical value and to be highly addictive.
And it's just so, listen, cannabis, everybody uses things in different ways, right? You can eat cheese. Too much cheese. Way too much cheese. Your tummy hurts. It's not good for your arteries. Terrible. Same thing with cannabis. I see those two as similar in the sense that, like, you're not going to, like, die. I mean, listen, I was in Mexico one time And Marta, who next time you go to Vallarta, another person you have to meet, she's the best.
Fantastic.
Marta is a chef, like she grew up on the border of California and Mexico, classic lesbian feminist, like 80s San Francisco.
Perfect.
You would be obsessed with her.
Perfect.
And she loves cannabis. And I didn't bring CBD with me. And and I've talked about this a lot on my show. I've talked about this on many shows when people have asked me how I typically use cannabis. I love a high ratio of CBD to cannabis. So I love like a 2 to 6, 1 to 10, whatever. I use it for pain and anxiety and sleep. So those are the kind of ratios, if anybody's listening, that they should look out for.
Please send.
Please sponsor me. And so I was there and she had this little thing that looked like a syringe, like a baby little syringe. And she's like, I think this is CBD. You should take it. I was like, okay, yeah, sure, no problem.
I know where this is going.
So I had been drinking mezcal all day. And this is before I went on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication. And if I drank too much, it would be really hard for me to sleep. And I was like pretty fucked up. And I was like, oh my God, I'll do what I do all the time, which is take a little bit CBD, which I like because again, it's not taking Advil. It's not, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I took the syringe and I just shoved it in my mouth. That was the last thing I remember. And it was disgusting. It coated my whole mouth. It was like sticky tape. It was like almost like
glue.
It was glue, correct.
Yeah.
And
it's called Rick Simpson oil.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Well, I believe it was dab oil that I decided to eat. And I woke up in the morning, or actually I never slept, if I'm being honest with you. I went to different worlds. I felt like I was Sonic the Hedgehog in the casino world. I felt like I was in the Greek world. I don't know if anybody played Sega Genesis, but you'll get it, my references. I felt like I was seeing my body from another place. I've never felt so crazy in my life. I woke up, I called my wife, my now wife, and I said, I think I made a big mistake. Something happened. I feel out of body. I was shaking uncontrollably. My eyes were a deep purple red. And I had found out that I had ingested about 100 milligrams of concentrated cannabis. Now, for those listening, I don't like to take more than 2.5. 2.5. Maybe 1, maybe 2. 100 plus milligrams of concentrated dab oil is what I ate. But I didn't die. All I did, I drank water. I buried myself in the sand.
Yeah, look, you'll feel like shit. You can feel overwhelmed.
But I'm not going to overdose.
You can't overdose.
I'm never going to overdose. So my point that I've always been kind of so stuck on is this idea that all of these people are, listen, everybody can have their own opinion about drug dealing. I allegedly paid for my first year of school by doing what I did. You cannot equate, in my opinion, synthetic drugs to cannabis.
Right.
And it's fucking ridiculous.
Right. And look, I don't think it's not that there isn't an ability to abuse.
That's what
cannabis,
I'm saying. I think you can. Like,
definitely,
it can be
a
all day.
A crutch. It can be for escapism in the same way that, as you mentioned, so many other things can be. I think it's different in that cannabis is an inebriant. Notice that I won't call it an intoxicant. It's not a toxin to your body. Alcohol is an intoxicant. Your body, it's poisoning your body.
Even though I really do like this wine.
My God,
Where's Nick?
Love wine.
Nick, bring us the wine. This wine is delicious. Yes.
Love a glass of wine. Love alcohol. I worked in alcohol for a long time as well. But cannabis is similar but different. It's not hurting your body. But that doesn't mean you can't
that's what I'm saying.
form
it's like
a relationship
cheese.
with it.
It's literally
exactly.
like cheese. It's like sugar. I totally agree. It's like you can over abuse anything. You can do too much. I see these girls on TikTok, they put makeup, they put pounds of foundation on their face, abusing the foundation.
Right.
You know what I mean? Where do you see the future of cannabis going?
Let me tell you where I hope I see it going.
Okay.
I hope that we see increased distribution. And by that, I mean, I hope that it becomes easier to sell and distribute and give larger groups of people access to it in such a way that then creates a stable and healthy economy for it on the business side. Obviously, I'm biased. I'm in the cannabis business side of things, and we struggle really hard. We struggle a lot for people to have access to knowing who we are. You know, we're forbidden from nearly all traditional marketing, and small boutique companies really struggle to exist because of the way that the legal system is working. And so you're looking at this hyper capitalization, this sort of deeply, monopolized industry immediately. And so having craft farms, if you're looking at the cannabis industry and you're looking at alcohol, or speaking of alcohol as an analog, we've fast forwarded to just Bud Light and Busch. But where is that in between, where people really who want to spend their energy and their life on the craft and create a beautiful product that can be more health driven, that can be more experience driven, are really being squished and squeezed out? And I think that's the exact opposite of what we wanted to happen with opening the cannabis market. So my dream would be a more balanced and fair legal system that gives more opportunity to small and craft companies, and most importantly, gives more opportunity to queer, to Black and brown operators in the space that really deserve this the most, right?
Yeah.
These are the advocates, and these are the bearers and the forefathers of and for people and persons of where we are today that are being severely disadvantaged now in the legal space.
I want to say first and foremost, I reached out to a few, and I only say a few because it feels like there is only a few female identifying cannabis founders in the industry, to no avail, which really sucked. I was pleased and grateful and humbled by the lovely cis men that I interviewed in this episode. But I just want to say that because I don't want to get any backlash. From what I gathered from Drew and what I've seen here in the last couple of years in LA is that the queer community in cannabis is getting a lot stronger. And he pointed me into the direction of Bud's Digest, which is this stunning, gorgeous publication, that discusses a lot of issues and conversations within the cannabis space, but then also more specifically kind of the queer community and conversation in cannabis, which I absolutely love. They have had the most incredible people on their covers, everyone from King Princess to Bowen Yang. They've got a few more that seem like they're going to be major because they're major, but I love me a high curated, elevated, yes, those are all cannabis puns, publication from Brooklyn. And these two, Ben and Mac, give me their perspective on the space, how they came up with Bud's Digest, and they were just lovely to talk to. It's interesting. I think the publishing world, because I have worked in it on and off my entire career, has always really wanted, and I should say the larger, more commercial publishing world has always wanted to kind of cover cannabis outside of the old school cannabis focused magazines. But I think they've always struggled, or they've been too fearful to do so. That was always my experience. So what made you want to start a cannabis publication in the first place?
Totally.
Yeah, do you want to start, Ben?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think about often, which is something that was phrased like this back to us, but queerness and cannabis were kind of fringe cultural things for a long time, taboo and not fully accepted. And we're in an interesting place right now where both of them are kind of being accepted into the mainstream or being talked about more often. So there's a very interesting connection and overlap there, I think. I think on like a basic level, we're both queer and we're both interested in cannabis. So it was kind of like, well, that's would be fun for us. I think we're both really interested in kind of like escapism or psychedelia or something. And then also the cultural elements of being queer. And how important that is to talk about right now, just as much as ever. So I think, yeah, using that kind of little corner as a way to talk about queer people is really fun and exciting to us.
Why is it important to have a queer focused cannabis community magazine and community in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look around the world right now. It's like queer and LGBTQ rights have been, riding a wave, but also they're completely under attack again. And I think any sort of lens that you can put on any sort of queer person doing anything is really important at this time.
We also have a unique angle, I think, for Buds Digest in particular, is that I think queer people can have very unique relationships with each other. And both Ben and I experienced that with our own partnerships, and also in a way with each other and with friends here in New York City, that this concept of having a bud is very loose for queer people. And we can kind of define our relationships with each other on really original terms. So I think, our idea to merge queerness and cannabis in Buds Digest sort of was a natural fit, because we really wanted the editorial to be based around conversations between two people. This was our original idea. We always wanted two people who like to smoke together, who like to just hang out together, to get into like an intimate conversation. So, and these people could be bandmates or siblings or lovers or friends. And they all found kind of unique points of view to talk about cannabis in the magazine.
I remember being, 18, 19, walking around the streets of New York City, smoking weed. And it was so not taboo. Well, yeah, no, maybe I'll go with it. It was pretty taboo coming from California. And I did a stint in Western Massachusetts in Northampton, which is a pretty like hippie liberal place. So while at that time I had to like go into a weird cemetery or the woods or something to smoke weed so that I wouldn't get kicked out of school, New York, it just felt like such a fun place to be stoned. It was like, it was like crazy for me. And I had such a fondness growing up in San Francisco, smoking weed and like walking along the water. And so to do that, but people wouldn't like stare at me, as much in San Francisco, because it was more culturally acceptable to have cannabis in San Francisco. But in New York in the early 2000s, people were like, what the fuck? It was like as if I was doing heroin on the street. That's like how it felt. People would just stare, And now, wow, I was just about to say 10, which is really not optimistic. Accurate. I was really just about to say 10 years later. And it's not. It's 20. Wow, fuck. Yep. Okay, so 20 years later, it feels like everybody like hits a vape or smokes. And now, obviously, the technology has changed where you can just like smoke a vape in public and it doesn't even smell like weed, which is, I could have really used that back in the day. Do you think New York City is a wonder, like now that it's recreationally legal, which felt like it took forever, do you think that New York City is still one of the best places to like walk around and be high?
Certainly a lot of stimulus, right?
Well, yeah, it's a lot to look at. A lot of smells, a lot of sounds.
I think one of the coolest things about New York is how they release the laws for it. And I think whenever people ask, because they come and visit, like, what's the law? What's the law? And it's anywhere you can smoke a cigarette, you can smoke weed.
Oh, really?
Absolutely. That's like the bottom line. If you can smoke a cigarette there, you can also be smoking weed.
Is that the same
in all of New York State? Yeah.
I wonder if that's the same in California. What have you learned about your queerness since creating Buds Digest?
I think it's a really interesting question. And I think the biggest thing for me is just I love like collaborating with more and more people, and kind of like it's expanded my immediate network and my immediate like community of cool queer people doing queer things and cool creative stuff. So that is really just enriching and feels great. And I want more of that in my life, for sure. How I think about myself as a queer or something, I'm not sure it's really changed other than like maybe validating that I think Mac and I both felt like this was a good lens to put onto like an interesting, somewhat niche sector of the community. And it's nice to know that there's like so many more people that it's like resonating with. And maybe they weren't feeling like they were being seen in other publications and stuff. So that's also extremely rewarding and encouraging and inspiring.
What about you, Mac?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a connection to others, both for myself. I love like reading our own articles and editing them, of course, and hearing people talk about, because we pose this question to artists that we admire to death. That's how Ben and I pick a lot of these subjects. Is it just artists that we love? We just had these two artists in conversation, Sarah Beth Tomberlin and Hand Habits, who are mutual musicians and tour mates and friends. And, we give them prompts in a similar way to this. And a lot of it is talking about their queerness. And I loved Tomberlin talking about how like Earth and the Woods were like queer to her. And that really resonated with me. It's something that I feel like I think about if I'm smoking or if I'm doing mushrooms. I think gay people have come from this sort of like ancient spring or something, at least I feel like that when I'm like really tripping. And so to hear somebody else kind of say the same thing, she's like, queerness and this intersection is definitely earthbound, and little stuff like that kind of makes me feel, even less alienated. And I think that it does it for our readers too.
I love that. I want to be on mushrooms and think about queer people coming from the creeks and the leaves. That's fucking awesome. That's great. Do you think cannabis still has the vibe of like headshots, sublime kind of bro culture? Or do you think that it has changed at all?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's personal for each person too. And it's proven in the magazine just because we get so many unique perspectives from, an international level, but certainly a national level, people who grew up in California versus Chicago or New York. And yeah, and for me too, I mean, all through, I always thought head shops and stuff were like weird places growing up, like I grew up in Nevada and there was a lot of like sort of white trash, like association with cannabis. And like, and even if I may say on air, she would kill me, but I grew up in like a pot household, like they grew plants in my house growing up. And so it was very, very hippie dippy liberal. And I like rejected against that. I thought that was like the opposite of what I wanted to do. So I didn't smoke weed until I was like 30 years old, pretty much.
Really?
Yeah. All through my 20s, I was completely straight edge. So it's been an interesting, like, second sort of coming to earth a little, or like coming out a little bit. It was like, I kind of became a different kind of gay, I think, at 30.
So what was that experience like? Can you describe like when you decided to smoke cannabis for the first time at 30?
Yeah, I was in a long relationship all through my 20s, and then I left that relationship and had a very sad rebound. But when I met my now husband, he was a big stoner, and I had never ever thought about being with a stoner or anything. And he certainly was one of the main influences for Buds Digest. Meeting him and having this very, very sweet and soft connection that would often surround the plant. It was really cool. I'd never fallen in love with someone and used cannabis during that time. And it's really cool. It's really unique. And again, like we've had John Roberts from Bob's Burgers in the magazine, who's a huge stoner. And he released an album this year and he has a song called Stoned in Love. And it's a little bit about that. And it's funny to see these examples of sort of Buds Digest that exist for a lot of different people, so, and I had that experience, and that proved to me that the cannabis is cool.
We found love in a gay, hopeless cannabis place. I absolutely love the idea of two people falling in love by changing their perspective on something, because that is what I really got from Mac when he told me about how he softened his views on cannabis and softened into such a puddle that he ended up getting married, which I absolutely love. A few things I want to do before we wrap up this episode is I want to shout out Buds Digest IRL meet and greet in the park this June 11th. in Prospect Park. I'll put some information on Instagram there. Who doesn't want to smoke weed in the park? I did, all in my high school days, and I'd love to now. You should check out Drew Martin if you are in a state that sells recreational cannabis. It's amazing. It's low dose. It's botanical. It's beautiful. They're the fucking best, and they do really good things in the world. And I think I'm actually going to make like my ultimate stoner playlist. And I'll throw it up on the Patreon. So if you haven't checked out the Patreon, check it out. I just did my first live Q&A with my dear friend Mariana McGrath, where we did some pride makeup, trying to program and do some fun things for you guys there. But hope you enjoyed this episode. I have highlights on my Instagram all about CBD. You can always ask me questions. I also have a full list on my Patreon about every single cannabis and CBD product that I love. So definitely can share as much information as I have, but enjoy being gay and enjoy being stoned, and happy Pride.